February 2021. A heavy atmosphere hung over the abandoned Crow Creek warehouse, 3 miles north of Chamberlain, South Dakota. The beam from Investigator Clara Shaw's flashlight cut through the dense darkness, illuminating the cold, cracked cement floor where time had stood still for 43 years. Dispatch: I need backup at the Crow Creek warehouse and send forensics immediately. Possible human remains. Clara's voice echoed in the damp, chilly space, bouncing off the peeling concrete walls. What began as a routine review of a cold case file had now turned into something entirely different, something that would answer questions haunting Chamberlain for 4 decades. Beneath the weathered cement, the forensics team uncovered human bones, a piece of red wool scarf, and a silver bracelet engraved with M.E., an item investigators once believed was lost forever. The bracelet belonged to Mary Ellison, an 18-year-old who vanished on a snowy February night in 1977. For nearly half a century, Mary's disappearance was a series of unanswered questions. A classmate's birthday party, a girl leaving home in a red coat, and a Ford Pinto found abandoned on Crow Creek Road, doors locked, wallet and coat still inside, but Mary gone. For years, police searched the Missouri River banks, scoured every forest, but found no trace. The last person to see Mary was Thomas Kepler, a 23-year-old student teacher at her school. He claimed he only walked her to her car, and then the case fell silent. No evidence, no witnesses, no answers. And with that winter, the Ellison-Mary, 1977 file was shelved, left to gather dust in the archives in Pierre. Before we continue this chilling story, please hit subscribe and like this video. Your support helps bring these buried cases to light and ensures you don't miss what's coming next. The discovery at Crow Creek wasn't just the end of a missing person case. It was the first domino in a chain of events that would expose secrets buried for decades in this small Missouri River community. Because when authorities finally identified a suspect and made an arrest in 2021, it wasn't a drifter or an unknown criminal. It was someone the community had trusted, someone who had taught their children and who had lived among them for over 40 years, carrying an unimaginable secret. The Mary Ellison case isn't just a mystery solved, it's a testament to a mother's persistence in sending letters for 2 decades. To young investigators who refused to let the file gather dust, and to modern forensic science, giving a voice back to victims silenced too long. It's also a story of a community divided. When Mary vanished in 1977, suspicion spread through Chamberlain like wildfire. Neighbors accused neighbors. Friends grew distant. The story of that 18-year-old girl exposed hidden cracks in a seemingly peaceful town, cracks that would explode when the truth came to light. What makes this case especially haunting is that the answer was always so close. Kepler, the man questioned in the initial investigation, lived freely for 43 years. During that time, he attended Mary's memorial, looked her mother in the eye, and maintained an innocent facade while hiding a horrific secret. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. I'm always curious to know how far these stories travel and how they connect us across distances. Tonight, we'll go back to the winter of 1977, trace a 4-decade investigation, and uncover the DNA breakthrough that shook South Dakota. This is a story of loss, resilience, deception, and ultimately, justice delayed, but never denied. February 1977, Chamberlain, South Dakota, nestled along the icy Missouri River, lay blanketed in thick snow and biting wind. The small streets were covered in white, shop windows fogged with frost, and the distant train whistle echoed through the snowy valley like the breath of a northern winter. Locals were used to this prolonged silence, the wind swirling around rooftops and streetlights, casting beams on icy, mirror-like surfaces. Mary Ellison, 18, the only daughter of Ellen Ellison, was in her final year at Chamberlain High. With long brown hair, a gentle smile, and a habit of writing by the window each afternoon, she was eagerly preparing college applications for Sioux Falls. On a Friday evening, after a shift at the bookstore, Mary changed, slipped on the red sweater her mother had knitted, and said she was heading to a classmate's birthday party at a small diner on Main Street. Ellen saw her to the door, warning her about the slippery roads. The door closed, leaving the scent of cold snow and a trace of shampoo lingering in the air. Outside, headlights flickered through the fog, then vanished into the thick white blur of the northern night. In the wooden house by the road, Ellen sat alone in her rocking chair, listening to the clock's steady ticking, its second hand scraping through the silence. She stared out the window, seeing only wind-tossed snow piling on the fence. An hour passed. 2. The room grew colder as the fireplace embers faded, and the clock struck midnight. Ellen stood, glanced at the phone on the cabinet, and picked it up. Her voice trembled with worry. "My daughter hasn't come home." On the other end, the dispatcher asked for a name, age, description. Ellen answered, amid the howling wind outside, "Mary Ellison, brown hair, red coat." In Chamberlain, during the longest winter, the first missing person report was filed. No one knew that, from that moment, Mary had vanished from everyone's sight. The next morning, snow still fell. On Chamberlain's main street, rooftops were blanketed white, and police cars lined up in rows. Sheriff Roy Gunderson, a burly man with graying hair from years of cold winds, stood at the station, pointing at a map on the wall, assigning search teams. His voice was hoarse from sleeplessness. "We'll split 3 ways, 1 team along Main Street, 1 along the riverbank, and 1 toward Crow Creek Road." Outside, the sky was heavy gray, the cold seeping through every layer of clothing. Dozens of townsfolk, firefighters, students, and a few volunteer hunters gathered, carrying shovels, flashlights, and ropes. Ellen Ellison was there, wrapped in a wool scarf, clutching a small photo of her daughter, showing it to everyone, her voice breaking. "If anyone sees Mary, please call me right away." Roy nodded to her quietly, then signaled to begin. Snow reached knee-deep, each step crunching like breaking wood. The wind forced searchers to bow their heads, flashlights flickering across bare trees. At the start of Crow Creek Road, snowmobiles roared, leaving trails of white exhaust against the gloomy sky. Police dogs barked sharply, then fell silent. All that remained was the wind and breaths, steaming in the air. Roy led the way, his boots sinking deep into the snow, eyes scanning for any sign. Occasionally, he bent down, picking up a scrap of cloth, a piece of paper, or a broken branch, only to toss it aside. Visibility was limited to a few meters. Fresh snow covered tracks almost instantly, erasing every step. A young deputy turned back, speaking through a scarf. "We won't find anything in this snow." Roy didn't respond, only motioned for silence. He knew time was slipping against them, each hour burying their chances under more snow. By noon, the searchers spread along the Missouri River. The frozen water's thick ice reflected cold light. Some peered into cracks where dark water flowed beneath. Ellen stood by the bank, hands clutching her scarf, eyes empty. A rescuer approached, saying softly, "We'll find her, ma'am." Ellen nodded, but said nothing. She knew all reassurances now were just whispers in the wind. In the afternoon, the snow paused. Weak sunlight pierced thick clouds, casting a faint silver glow. A student searcher, a boy named Paul, bent down where the road veered into a southern field, and shouted, "I see something here." Roy ran over, people crowding around. Half buried in thick snow was a red wool glove. Roy carefully lifted it with his fingertips, its deep red under the gray sky, almost blended into brown. "It's hers," Ellen gasped, hands trembling, eyes fixed on the small item in the sheriff's hand. Roy signaled for photos, marked the spot, and sealed the glove in a bag. He looked around. No tracks continued, no other objects, just the cold wind stinging his face. He knew fresh snow had covered everything. Beneath that white layer could be anything or nothing. "We'll come back when it clears," he said, voice low. As dusk fell, the weak yellow glow of patrol car lights lit the snow. Shadows faded in the wind. The first day's search ended in silence. At the station, Roy spread the map on the table, marking the glove's location with a red pen. Ellen sat in a corner, hands wrapped around a cold coffee mug. Outside, the wind rose again, whistling through window frames like a sigh. No one said it, but they all knew the snow was hiding something. And if they didn't find it soon, it would bury all traces forever. 3 days after the glove was found, snow began to melt slightly on the southern slopes toward the plains. Hope was fading when a local hunter named Bill Larson called the station. His voice rasped over the phone, "There's an abandoned car at the Crow Creek turnoff. You guys should check it out." Roy Gunderson grabbed his heavy coat, motioned for 2 young deputies to follow, and they drove a state jeep along the narrow, half-snow-covered dirt road. The deeper they went, the colder the wind, with only sparse pines leaning under the weight of ice on either side. Around noon, they spotted the car, a pale blue Ford Pinto, half buried in gray snow, windshield fogged with frost. It was the vehicle police had put out an alert for 3 days earlier. Roy stopped the jeep, took a deep breath, and stepped out. The snow crunched under his boots. No fresh tire tracks led to it, meaning the car had been there since the night of the disappearance. Roy approached, gloved hands on, peering inside through the frosted window. The driver's seat was slightly reclined, holding a leather wallet, a purse strap draped over the gear shift, and a neatly folded cream-colored wool coat on the passenger seat. He recognized the careful folding, done by a woman, precise and tidy. Everything was intact. No signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no forced entry. But what stopped him was a dark, dried smear above the rear door handle, small but unmistakably blood. He signaled the deputy behind him. "Cordon it off. Don't touch anything." They marked the area, staking small flags in the snow. Every step was photographed with a Polaroid. The wind gusted, blowing a few shots away, and Roy shielded his eyes to see clearly. A few steps from the car, the young deputy called back, "Sir, something here." Roy walked over, spotting a small red fabric piece, half buried in snow, matching the thick wool of the glove found earlier. He sealed it in a bag, silent. His eyes caught something else, a large men's boot print in old snow, heading toward Crow Creek Forest, then vanishing where the wind blew hardest. Roy stood still, his weathered eyes narrowing, then muttered, "Someone stopped here." Not just her. He called for the crime scene and forensic team from Pierre via radio. Hours later, the area was cordoned with yellow tape, and white-suited figures moved around the car. They opened the doors, tweezing small items. Everything inside was cataloged. A purse with cash, a student ID, lipstick, and a notebook with a final penciled line. "Home early, mail app tomorrow." As daylight faded, forensics worked on. Roy leaned against the jeep, holding an unlit cigarette for an hour. The wind chilled his neck, making him shiver. A forensic tech approached. "No other tracks besides the old ones you found. Snow might have erased the rest." Roy asked quietly, "The blood?" The tech shook his head. "Small, completely dry. Not enough for a type, but definitely not from a random accident." Roy stayed silent. In his mind, he saw Ellen at the station days earlier, hands clenched, asking, "If she crashed, would you believe me?" Darkness fell, patrol car lights casting yellow beams on the frozen Ford, making it look like a shipwreck in a sea of snow. A tow truck arrived, hooking steel cables to the frame, slowly pulling the car from the ditch. The rear wheels screeched, snow flaking off to reveal gray dirt and sand. In that moment, Roy felt the cold sink into his bones. He knew the silence here wasn't just winter's. As the convoy returned to town, headlights cut through the gray night, the Ford covered in a tarp, towed quietly behind. At the station, Roy wrote the scene report. Vehicle recovered intact. Interior shows no struggle. Evidence collected. Fabric sample. Blood smear. Footwear impression. Conclusion. Possible second individual present. He set the pen down, reread the final line. Possible second individual, and drew a faint line beneath it. No one needed to say it. This was no longer a simple missing person case. Outside, snow began falling again, soft and steady, as if to cover everything just found. At the Chamberlain police station, Roy Gunderson sat before a list of names from the party that night. Mary Ellison's name was marked in red, with 17 others numbered. He began calling each one, from classmates to servers to the diner owner. Scattered accounts pieced together a blurry picture. Mary was cheerful, drank one beer, took a few Polaroids, chatted with friends, then left alone. But one name kept coming up: Thomas Kepler. He sat with Mary at the bar for a bit, a classmate said. Looked like they were arguing about something. Then Mary laughed, waved goodbye, and left first. A server recalled Kepler staying behind, ordering another beer after she left. Roy paused his pen, staring at the name on the paper. He vaguely remembered the guy, tall, lanky, a student teacher at the local high school, living alone in a rented house on Birch Street, 3 doors from the Ellisons. That afternoon, Roy and Sergeant Parker went to Kepler's house. The small gray-painted home had an uncleared snowy yard. Kepler answered the door in a turtleneck sweater, surprised but not panicked. Roy introduced himself, flashed his badge, and said calmly, "We just need a few minutes, about Mary Ellison." Kepler nodded, avoiding their eyes, and invited them in. Inside, the smell of coffee mixed with tobacco, a desk cluttered with books and papers. A map of northern states hung on the wall, pinned with photos of school classes. Roy began the questioning, voice steady and controlled. "Were you at the Blue Moose on Friday night?" Kepler nodded, answering quickly, "Yeah, my friend Sam O'Neill's birthday." Roy jotted it down. "Did you talk to Mary Ellison?" "Just for a few minutes. She said she was applying to college, asked about the teaching program. Then I walked her to the parking lot." Roy pressed, "Did you leave the diner right after?" Kepler looked up, his blue eyes dull. "Yeah, went straight home. I live alone, no one to vouch for me." Roy glanced at Parker. The answers were precise, almost too polished. He noted, no alibi, calm demeanor. Kepler kept his voice even, hands clasped. When asked if he knew Mary's car was found at Crow Creek, he looked up briefly, brows twitching. "I didn't know, I just walked her to her car." Roy caught the slight shift in his expression, not quite fear, more like calculation. To be thorough, they brought Kepler to the station for a polygraph test. In a small room, white light glared off the walls, electrodes attached to his hands, chest and neck. The technician asked each question. "Did you meet Mary Ellison that night?" "Yes." "Did you harm her?" "No." "Do you know where she is?" "No." The needles wavered slightly, no clear spikes. After, the technician looked at Roy, shaking his head. "Inconclusive. He's too calm." That evening, Roy reviewed the statements. Kepler's handwritten answers were neat, no corrections. A normal person might falter, but he didn't. Unease stirred in Roy, like standing before a frozen lake, unsure if deep water or a void lay beneath. He wanted to hold Kepler, but protocol didn't allow it. No evidence, no witnesses, no clear crime. Before releasing him, Roy asked once more, "Anything you want to say?" Kepler met his eyes, a faint smile flickering. "I hope she's safe. Mary's a good girl." The words were simple, but his tone held no concern, just flat exhaustion. As Kepler left the station, Roy sat at his desk, the yellow lamp casting light on the papers. He wrote the report, interviewed subject Thomas Kepler, male 23, local resident. Cooperative. No inconsistencies detected. Polygraph inconclusive. No probable cause for detainment. At the end, he paused, then added a small note in firm script. Continue observation. That night, snow fell again, blanketing the road to the river. In her wooden house, Ellen sat silently, a table lamp casting yellow light on her daughter's photo before her. Outside, patrol car lights swept through the snow like distant heartbeats. Roy passed her house on his way home, saw the light, but didn't stop. He knew he couldn't say anything with only a hunch. And hunches, in his line of work, were both a life-saving instinct and the easiest way to be wrong. The next morning, wind from the Missouri River brought freezing mist. Snow stopped, but the sky remained heavy with leaden clouds. Roy Gunderson gathered the search team at the Chamberlain Bridge. "We're expanding downstream," he said, voice rough. "If she slipped or had an accident, the current might have carried her. Below, the half-frozen Missouri River carried slabs of ice, clashing with dry, echoing cracks across the White Valley. 30 people split into 5 groups, equipped with markers, shovels, and radios. One group followed Crow Creek Road. Another traced the riverbank south. Police dogs led, occasionally barking, then falling silent, noses grazing the snow. The scene was both ordinary and eerie. Small figures moving across a vast white field, dark trees in the distance, like winter's skeletal frame. Mid-morning, the second group radioed, "We found something," about a mile from the riverbank. Roy jumped on a snowmobile with Parker, racing toward the coordinates. The air grew thick with the smell of damp mud and pine. Parker pointed. "There, sir," half buried in snow was a piece of red wool scarf. Roy knelt, picked it up. The thick wool was cold and damp, with a distinct dark stain. In the gray light, it was clearly dried blood, seeping into the fabric's weave. He carefully sealed the scarf in a plastic bag. "Mark the coordinates. Secure the area," he said. The team spread out, searching, but found no more traces. Ice cracked underfoot, snow covering each step. In the distance, the river stretched wide, mist rising in a thick white veil, blurring land and water. That afternoon, Roy returned to the station. He placed the sealed bag on the evidence room's metal table. Forensic tech Harold Briggs, a young man, gloved up and took a blood sample from the scarf. "ABO typing only, sir," he said. "We don't have DNA yet." Roy nodded, pulling out a cigarette but forgetting to light it. He stared at the scarf through the glass. Dirt-flecked wool, unevenly torn edges. He recalled Ellen the day Mary vanished, a similar scarf around the girl's neck. That red was now the only witness to whatever happened. 3 hours later, Briggs entered with a result sheet. "Type O," he said curtly. Roy looked at the paper, silent. Mary's medical file listed her as type O. He set the sheet down, looked up, his eyes heavy as unlit smoke. "Odds of a mismatch?" "Very low, sir. Not many around here have that type." Roy nodded, then walked out without another word. Dusk settled. From the Chamberlain Bridge, the river gleamed with faint purple twilight. Ice slabs drifted slowly, as if never to melt. Roy leaned on the railing, wind stinging his face until it went numb. In his mind, images connected: the glove, the abandoned car, the blood-stained scarf. They were forming a shadow he didn't want to acknowledge. Mary hadn't left this town on her own 2 feet. That night, at the police station, Roy wrote a preliminary report. Item recovered, red wool fragment with blood stain. ABO testing indicates type O, consistent with victim. Area searched, no body recovered. Investigation to continue. The final line he wrote slowly, with heavy strokes: possible foul play suspected. In the small house by the road, Ellen stayed awake. She kept the lamp burning all night, its faint yellow light casting a dim glow through the window onto the snow. She didn't know what the police had found, only that they hadn't called. The wall clock ticked steadily, and in the silence, she thought she heard her daughter's car returning from afar. But it was only the wind swirling through the pines. The next morning, Roy returned to the scene. Overnight snow had covered their dig site, erasing all footprints. Beneath the thick layer lay a frozen strip of earth, and somewhere, perhaps, the truth they hadn't reached. He stood gazing at the river, where morning mist rose like breath, and said quietly to Parker, "She didn't fall in there." "I believe that." Parker asked. "What do you think then?" Roy tightened his coat collar, eyes fixed on the river. "Someone wanted us to think she did." As they left, the wind picked up, sweeping fine snow over the last faint traces. Only the empty riverbank remained, with a small wooden stake marking where the scarf was found, a lone red dot in a white world. In the gray afternoon light, Roy Gunderson stood silently staring at the frozen river. He knew the search had reached its limit for now. No body, no new leads. Just fragile fragments of truth being swallowed by winter. "We need answers," he said softly, almost to himself. A week later, the blizzard cleared, and the highway reopened. Roy packed all evidence into sealed bags, marked with his signature and date, then drove east. The police car rolled through icy fields, tires crunching thin snow, the horizon glowing with March's faint orange sunset. He didn't speak the entire drive, occasionally glancing at the metal box beside him, holding the only remnants of Mary Ellison. The state crime lab in Pierre sat in a low building near an old industrial area, thick with the smell of chemicals and metal every morning. Roy walked in, his coat dusted with snow, and placed the box on a cold metal table. "This is all we have," he said quietly. The head technician, a thin man with dark circles behind thick glasses, nodded, gloved up, and began opening each evidence bag slowly, carefully, as if unraveling the frozen secrets of that winter. The lab then had only 4 staff and basic equipment: microscopes, chemical reagents, and a few old spectrometers. They worked for 3 days straight. A hair was placed under a microscope, white light revealing its natural striations. "Human hair, likely female," Technician Briggs said. "No root, so no cellular material." Roy stood behind, hands in his coat pockets, staring at magnified images he couldn't fully grasp. Just a fragile hair as the case's thin thread in a vast void. The blood was tested using the ABO method, the only technique available then. Result: type O, matching Mary's, but also the region's most common blood type. Briggs wrote briefly in the report, "Cannot exclude victim's origin, no trace of second profile." The fabric from the car's back seat was stained for fingerprints or grease, but revealed only old, unrelated dirt marks. They tested the wool scarf too. Some blood had dried, its fibers caked with fine sand, likely from wind exposure. Under the microscope, the blood was dark brown, insufficient for further analysis. "We're chasing shadows in snow." Briggs sighed, and the snows melted. Roy said nothing. He knew the answer before hearing it. Nothing was enough to charge anyone. A week later, he received a 2-page preliminary report in a hard folder. Pierre Forensic Laboratory Report, March 1977. Blood, type O, likely female, no secondary markers. Fiber, red wool, consistent with garment found at scene. Hair, human, brown, female, no follicle root for identification. Conclusion: no conclusive evidence to indicate suspect involvement. Roy set the file on the desk, hearing the paper scrape against cold wood, as thin as snow sliding outside. The room was so quiet he could hear the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. Parker, the young sergeant, sat nearby, and asked softly, "What's next?" Roy looked at the report, voice low. "Wait, or hope the snow gives back what it took." But the snow gave nothing back. March turned to April, then May, the river rising with melting ice, carrying away any remnants. Searches along Crow Creek ended with no findings. The wooden stakes were removed. Local police returned to routine work: traffic accidents, thefts, family disputes, small, constant cases filling the desk. The Mary Ellison case was pushed down the stack of incomplete files. One late May day, Roy went to the state office to report progress. The inspector from Pierre asked bluntly, "No body, no weapon, no witnesses. What do you want me to call this?" Roy answered shortly, "Suspicious missing." The man nodded, scribbled in the file, then said quietly, as if advising, "When there's nothing else, best to let it rest. Sometimes time speaks for us." Back in Chamberlain, Roy stopped by Ellen Ellison's house. She was mowing the lawn, face gaunt, eyes sunken. He told her the lab had nothing definitive. Ellen stood silent, then nodded, voice small. "I understand." She looked at the field behind, where snow had melted, exposing wet, dark streaks of earth. Last year, this season, Mary loved taking photos there. Roy didn't know what to say. He stood with her for a few minutes, then left. That evening, at the station, he opened his personal notebook, writing the case's final line. No conclusive evidence. Investigation pending. Subject presumed missing. He closed the book. The desk lamp flickered before going out, darkness flooding the room. Outside, spring winds carried Missouri River chill through the small houses and the land where Ellen lived alone. 3 months later, on June 12th, the state office issued a formal notice, Case 77-0412. Mary Ellison, suspicious missing person. The file was stamped red and stored in a metal cabinet with hundreds of other unsolved cases. Roy watched the ink seep into the paper, feeling like he'd sealed a coffin for someone still unfound. He stood by the window, gazing at a sky turning blue again, wondering if the next winter would bring anything but snow. But the answer, as always, was the silence of earth and wind. After the temporary suspension was signed, Case 77-0412, Mary Ellison was sealed in a brown folder, labeled red, and sent with the weekend document, transport from Chamberlain to the State Justice Department archive in Pierre. It was an old brick warehouse, 3 stories, smelling of damp paper and rusted metal. A clerk placed the file in slot 24B, among hundreds of others, missing persons, robberies, open cases, all coated in time's dust. He noted briefly on the log, unsolved, possible homicide. Then he closed the ledger, turned off the light, and the iron door shut with a heavy thud. In Chamberlain, summer arrived, snow melted, and the story of the missing girl faded too. The local paper ran a final line: police halt search for Mary Ellison, 18, due to no further evidence. At the high school, her desk stayed empty, then was replaced the next year. Her name vanished from the graduation list. Only Ellen Ellison, her mother, refused that silence. Every February, on the day Mary disappeared, she wrote to the state police. The long, slanted letters always began, "I am the mother of Mary Ellison, missing since 1977. Please tell me if there's anything new." The replies were always the same. No new information, but Ellen kept writing. She believed stopping would mean her daughter was truly forgotten. In 1982, she went to Pierre herself, carrying old photos and Mary's notebook, asking to meet a state investigator. A clerk met her in a bleach-scented hallway, saying softly, "The case is still open, but no one's assigned." "We're sorry." Ellen nodded, took the photocopied file, and left. Outside, wind blew a paper from her hand. She chased it, but it slipped into a gutter and dissolved. As she bent down, she saw her daughter's handwriting in the wet photo. "Home early, mail app tomorrow," noted in the police report. Years later, Ellen lived alone in the small house off Route 16. She kept the other half of the red wool scarf, matching the piece found by the river. Each winter, she hung it in the window, letting light shine through, red as the day's last sun. Neighbors called her stubborn, but for Ellen, it was the only way to remind the town Mary had existed. Sometimes, anonymous letters claimed sightings of a girl like Mary in Sioux Falls or Rapid City, but none were confirmed. Police noted them, then filed them away. In a 1992 interview, a local reporter asked, "Do you ever think Mary's dead?" Ellen looked out the window at the season's first snow, then said, "I don't know, but I know my daughter hasn't come home." In 2005, Ellen died at 68. On her bedside table was an unfinished letter addressed to Cold Case Department, Pierre, South Dakota. Inside the envelope, she placed a photo of Mary in her red coat, smiling in blurred sunlight, with a shaky note, "If anyone reads this, please don't forget her." A neighbor found her, and in that small house, the wall clock still ran, striking midnight. The same hour she'd called police years before. After the funeral, the house sat empty. Years later, new tenants moved in, and the Ellison mother-daughter story became a tale told on rainy nights. She kept a light on all night for her daughter to find her way home. But that light went out when the roof was fixed. New paint covering old stains, and Chamberlain's new generation barely knew Mary's name. In the Pierre archive, her file sat silent on a wooden shelf. Occasionally, a clerk passed by, noting its status, still inactive. No new evidence. Newer, thicker files piled over it, hiding her name. Each time a light flicked on, dust rose like mist. The old Polaroid of Mary in the file had yellowed, but still showed her by a wooden fence, hair blown by wind. Years passed, the world changed. DNA analysis emerged, becoming a tool to crack cases across America. But no one thought of the file in slot 24B until 43 years later, when a young female investigator arrived, opened the archive door, and saw a name half covered by time's dust. Ellison Mary, 1977. There on the file's first page was Roy Gunderson's handwritten note in faded blue ink. Possible foul play suspected. The ink had faded, but each word remained clear, a reminder from a past not yet at rest. And for years in Chamberlain, every winter when snow fell, some said they saw a faint yellow light on the road to Crow Creek, where Mary's last trace vanished. No one knew if it was real or just the memory of a town that never slept soundly. The South Dakota Justice Department Archive sits on Pierre's outskirts, a gray concrete building standing stark in the flat, quiet land, where winter winds from the Missouri River carry a long howling echo from the past. Inside, dozens of wooden shelves line up, each slot holding hundreds of yellowed files. On a March morning in 2020, Clara Shaw, a 37-year-old investigator with the Cold Case Unit, was reviewing a list of over 3,000 unsolved state cases. On her desk, files stacked half a meter high, unfamiliar names, old dates, people long gone. Clara had worked in the unit for 8 years. She wasn't the dramatic type, small frame, hair neatly tied, eyes alert and patient. Her job had no sirens, no flashing lights, just paper, ink, and time. But that's what she loved. When others forget, we keep asking. That morning she opened the 1970 to 1980 archive catalog. A thin file with a deep red label caught her eye. Ellison Mary, 1977. Suspicious missing. She pulled a small iron ladder, climbed to the third shelf, and retrieved a dusty cardboard box. The seal was faded but intact. Clara set it on the table, removed her gloves, and blew off the dust. Under fluorescent light, the handwritten blue ink from a long-ago officer was still legible. Possible foul play suspected. R. Gunderson. She opened the box. Inside, everything was carefully packed in old nylon bags. A red wool scarf fragment, dried blood in a glass vial, a hair in a small envelope, and 3 Polaroid photos of the Ford Pinto, abandoned in snow. On the back of one, someone had written in firm script, Crow Creek Road, February 20th, 1977. A chill ran down Clara's spine. Such files weren't rare, but something about the preserved evidence felt unusual. Everything was intact, undamaged, unmoved. Someone, likely Roy Gunderson, had meant to keep it like a promise. She sat quietly for a few minutes, reading the case summary. Just a few brief lines. Female, 18, missing from Chamberlain. Vehicle recovered. No body found. No suspect charged. Evidence stored pending further analysis. Clara folded the paper, leaned back in her chair. In 2020, technology could analyze DNA from samples no one thought possible. She knew a single hair, a dried bloodstain, could make the past speak again. She took the file box to the lab in the same building, where she worked with the Sioux Falls Forensic Analysis Unit, equipped with the new MVAC DNA extraction system, technology that could recover cells from decades-old samples. Lead technician Mark Laird greeted her with a familiar handshake. "What ancient thing did you bring me now?" Clara gave a tired smile. "A 77 missing person case. Evidence is intact." "I want to try the hair and scarf." Laird opened the box, peered through a lens. "The hair's thin, but there might be cellular traces on the cuticle. MVAC has a shot at pulling DNA, even from a few strands." Clara signed the transfer form. Below the last line, she penciled, "Reopened for DNA extraction, possible link to local suspect." She knew she was reopening a case dormant for over 40 years, but that made her heart beat faster, not from excitement, but from the weight of touching a forgotten shadow. That afternoon, she returned to her small cold case unit office. Walls lined with black and white photos and numbered files. Sunset light filtered through frosted glass, casting a pale gold glow on gray folders. She placed the Polaroid from the box on her desk, the Ford half buried in snow, headlights reflecting like wide eyes in the dark. Below, old handwriting trembled, likely Roy's Crow Creek, blood on rear door. Clara snapped a photo with her phone, uploading it to the state's new digital archive. The screen read, Uploading case 770412. In that moment, she felt like she was waking a long-buried memory. A case thought forgotten began to stir again. That evening, as she left the office, she paused in the hallway, looking down at the glass window above the archive. The room's flickering lights reflected on floating dust. She wondered how many of these cases would have their victims' voices heard again through modern technology. How many names waited for someone to open their box, read their first line. Before turning off the light, Clara opened her notebook, writing in a small corner, Ellison, Mary, missing 1977. Evidence intact. Possible DNA recovery. Request MVAC extraction. Outside, Missouri River winds rose. Cold air slipped through the long hallway, rustling papers. In the building's only lit room, the old file box sat on the table, newly sealed with a label dated March 12, 2020. On the cover, "Reopened" was underlined in thin red. Below, Clara's pen added, "Cold Case Unit, under review." After nearly half a century, Mary Ellison's file was opened again. This time, instead of snow, science would illuminate what time had buried. 2 weeks after sending the samples, Clara Shaw got an internal call from the Sioux Falls Forensic Lab. Mark Laird's voice was hoarse from late nights. "Clara," he said slowly. "We have results." She stopped typing, heart racing. "You sure?" "Sure. Very clear. That old hair sample, you'll want to see this in person." Clara drove nearly 4 hours east through flat fields and small towns, where only wind lingered. The lab's glass building appeared in a new industrial park, clean and brightly lit. She signed in, took a visitor badge, and went straight to the basement where the DNA lab housed MVAC and advanced capillary electrophoresis analyzers. Mark waited by a screen, eyes red from lack of sleep, but a faint smile on his face. On the screen, a chart showed DNA peaks, colored lines representing gene sequences. He pointed to a marked section. "We pulled a Y chromosome from the hair sample. Stable result, almost no noise. When we ran it against CODIS, it matched 99.98% to a sample in the system." Clara leaned in, reading the name on the screen's corner, Thomas R. Kepler. She paused, then repeated softly, as if to confirm. "Kepler? You're sure it's Kepler?" "Sure. This DNA was logged in CODIS in 2015. From a voluntary teacher health screening, he donated blood. The system kept the Y chromosome for male crime cross-referencing. It matches perfectly with the hair from the victim's car door handle." Clara stared at the screen. The numbers were cold, but to her they screamed like the past's cry. 43 years ago, this man was questioned, then released for lack of evidence. Now, science brought his name back. "Thank you, Mark," she said quietly. "You don't know what this means." She left the lab with a printed result and data disk. Driving back to Pierre, light rain fell. Droplets clung to the windshield, streetlights reflecting like DNA strands. Clara turned on the radio, then off. Only one name filled her mind, Thomas Kepler. That night, at the Cold Case Unit office, she reopened the 1977 file. Among yellowed pages, Roy Gunderson's handwritten note stood out. Interviewed Thomas Kepler. No probable cause. Below, his signature scratched the paper. Clara sat up, pulling out Kepler's Polaroid from the file. A young face, neatly combed hair, cold blue eyes. Underneath, faint typewritten text, occupation, student teacher, Chamberlain High School. She opened her laptop, accessing the state's civilian database. After a few minutes, the screen showed the latest record. Thomas Richard Kepler, born 1953, residing in Yankton, South Dakota. Occupation, retired high school teacher. Living alone, no criminal record. Clara sat still, feeling two moments overlap. The 23-year-old from the old file and the 68-year-old of today. Same face, only aged by time. She printed the results, drafting a case reopening report with utmost care. The first line she typed deliberately. Subject, Mary Ellison, DNA profile, recovered from archived hair sample. Match with Thomas R. Kepler, Yankton, South Dakota. Recommendation: reopen investigation and pursue suspect. At midnight, she submitted the report to the state security system, sending copies to the Brule County Prosecutor's Office and South Dakota Bureau of Investigation. An automated reply flashed. Case 77, Sebro 412 status changed. Active. Reopened per DNA evidence. The small text made her sit still for a long time. 43 years later, the Mary Ellison case was alive again. The next morning, at a cold case unit briefing, Clara presented the findings to the team. Silence fell as she placed Mary's Polaroid and the car scene photos on the table. This was considered a missing person case. No doubt now, it's a homicide, she said. DNA from the hair on the victim's car door handle matches Kepler, the original 1977 suspect. He's still alive, still in the state. The unit commander, Captain Harris Madsen, leaned back in his chair, nodding, good. After all these years, at least science has answered the first question, who touched that car? He looked at Clara, from now on, this case is under your investigation. Prepare the paperwork for a surveillance warrant. Clara gathered the documents, feeling a weight on her shoulders. She didn't know what part of the past she had just stepped into, only that she couldn't stop. That evening, she reread Kepler's old statement. The tone in the handwritten lines was chillingly cold. I only walked her to her car and went home. Nothing else happened. The words seemed to echo still, but now they were no longer innocent. They were evidence. Outside, Pierre's weather turned cold again. Wind whistled through the windows, like tearing paper. Clara set her coffee mug down, opened her notebook and wrote briefly, Kepler, verify residence, obtain secondary DNA, initiate surveillance. 43 years is long enough. She sat silently for a moment, the desk lamp's yellow light falling on the freshly written words. In the archive below, the old file box remained on its shelf, now bearing a new red label. Reopened, DNA match identified. After all those years, Mary Ellison finally had someone speaking for her, not with words, but with the cold genetic code etched in another's DNA. And Clara knew, when DNA spoke, all other lies would soon fall silent. In the week after the Mary Ellison case was reopened, Thomas Richard Kepler became the most frequent name in the cold case unit's internal reports. Clara Shaw worked with the South Dakota Bureau of Investigation to verify all his personal information. Administrative records showed Kepler, 68, had retired in 2016 after teaching physics at Yankton High School for over 30 years. No wife, no children, no criminal record. Locals described him as a polite, reserved man who liked gardening and reading. Tax records, insurance, bank accounts, everything was so normal, it was almost unbelievable. But in cases where time was an accomplice, normal was often the thickest dust covering the truth. Clara, with her partner Sergeant Ben Hartford, went to Yankton one late March afternoon. The street, where Kepler lived, was on the town's eastern edge, lined with sloped roof houses and yards of dry yellow grass. His was a small pale blue house, curtains always drawn. They parked half a block away, observing through binoculars. Kepler appeared near 5 o'clock, carrying a grocery bag, walking slowly. He wore a thick coat and a low wool cap, the image of a solitary old man. No signs of alertness, Ben noted. Clara didn't respond, only jotting in her notebook, routine, predictable pattern. They watched him for 3 consecutive days. Mornings, Kepler tended tomato plants in his backyard. Noon, he walked to the post office. Afternoons, he visited the town library to borrow books. Evenings, his house lights stayed on until 10 p.m., then went out. A perfect schedule to avoid notice. But that made Clara more wary. He lives too neatly, too clean, she said, from the surveillance car, eyes fixed through the camera lens. Ben nodded. No one keeps habits this regular, unless they're hiding something. On the 4th day, they collected secondary DNA samples covertly. When the city trash truck came, DCI operatives accessed Kepler's garbage, retrieving 2 empty beer cans, an old toothbrush, and used tissues. All were sealed, labeled, and rushed to the Sioux Falls Forensic Lab. While awaiting results, Clara reread Roy Gunderson's 1977 notes. Kepler calm, no alibi, inconclusive polygraph. Below was a faded remark, something off in his eyes. She wondered if Roy, the officer from years ago, had sensed something he couldn't prove. 3 days later, Clara's phone rang in her office. Mark Laird's voice came through, no longer tired but firm. Results confirmed. DNA from the toothbrush and tissues matches the Y chromosome from the hair in the Mary Ellison file perfectly, no doubt. Clara sat still, feeling the room shrink. 43 years, and now they had a second, undeniable piece of evidence. She immediately drafted a report for the Brule County Prosecutor's Office, attaching all evidence. In the summary, the final line was bolded. DNA match confirmed. Probable cause established for arrest. That same day, State Prosecutor James Rourke approved the arrest warrant request. Everything was done quietly, the way Clara preferred. No press, no leaks. That afternoon, at DCI headquarters, the team gathered around a large map on the table. Clara pointed to Kepler's house. "We move in early morning, when he's still home," she said. No chance for him to destroy documents or flee. Ben Hartford was assigned to lead the entry team, while Clara would handle the interrogation post-arrest. Captain Madsen stood at the table's end, nodding. "If this succeeds, it's the state's longest cold case closed. Be thorough. Don't let a procedural error let him slip." That night, Clara barely slept. She sat in her hotel room, reviewing the files again. The Polaroid of Mary on the table, a young girl with a gentle smile and red coat, made Clara's breath catch. She imagined Roy Gunderson writing possible foul play suspected and closing the file, unaware that 43 years later, someone else would reopen it. She whispered, as if to the girl in the photo, "We're almost there, Mary." The next morning, Yankton was cloaked in thin fog, pale light, spreading like milk over quiet rooftops. The clock read 5:50 a.m. Birch Street was still asleep. Cold river air lingered around iron fences, and a distant truck horn echoed faintly. 3 unmarked cars stopped 50 meters from Thomas Kepler's pale blue house. The lights inside were off. Clara Shaw pulled up her collar, double-checking the arrest warrant, signed by Prosecutor James Rourke the night before. On it, printed clearly, Thomas Richard Kepler, arrested under suspicion of homicide, case 77-0412. The DCI task force split into 2 groups, one at the front door, the other circling to the backyard. Clara joined Sergeant Ben Hartford, stepping onto the porch. They heard a faint clock ticking inside, slow, steady, like the breath of an old house. Ben knocked 3 times hard on the wooden door. "Mr. Thomas Kepler, this is South Dakota State Police. We have a warrant for your arrest." No response, only wind slipped through the door's cracks, carrying the damp smell of old wood floors. Moments later, slow footsteps sounded, and the lock turned. The door cracked open. Thomas Kepler stood there, silver hair falling over his forehead, wearing a dark sweater and house slippers. His face was deeply lined, but his pale blue eyes shone oddly bright under the hallway light. He looked at Clara, then at the officers behind her, and gave a faint smile. "You're 40 years late," no one replied. Ben read the warrant, voice firm. Kepler nodded, raising both hands forward as if he'd rehearsed the motion. No resistance, no questions, no request for a lawyer. Just absolute, polished silence, cold as glass. Clara watched as they cuffed him. A strange feeling rose in her chest, part relief, part heaviness, as if she were touching a ghost, not a man. As Kepler stepped outside, morning fog glinted on his wrists, flashing between steel and cold air. He squinted at the light, then glanced back at his house one last time. Inside, the search team began. Clara crossed the threshold, greeted by the smell of old paper, pine, and tobacco. Everything was unnervingly tidy. Books aligned on shelves, a desk covered with a pristine white cloth. In a corner was an old Chamberlain map, its wooden frame dark, edges frayed. Thin red lines traced from the town center to Crow Creek, the exact area where Mary vanished in 1977. On the desk, under a stack of old newspapers, Clara found a Polaroid, Mary Ellison in her red coat, standing by a wooden fence, smiling softly. The faded photo was carefully kept in a plastic frame. Beside it was a small yellow paper, handwritten in shaky black ink. February 18th. She fell. Clara paused, eyes fixed on those last two words. She fell, the same phrase he'd used 40 years ago in his statement to Roy Gunderson. Just two words, but they carried a chilling layer of concealment. No guilt, no remorse, only a stark description of an event. As the tech team photographed evidence, Clara walked the room, noting every detail. Above the fireplace were old notebooks filled with physics formulas and numbers. The back window was sealed with foil to block light. In a desk drawer, they found 3 more Missouri River area maps, all marked at Crow Creek in red pen. A small notebook tucked among papers held incomplete lines. They'll ask, but there's nothing left to say. While collecting evidence, Clara looked out at the backyard. Beyond the fence was dry yellow grass, wind swaying bare branches. Everything was eerily silent, as if the house had been cut off from the outside world for years. She realized this man hadn't just evaded justice, he'd fled his own life. As they led Kepler to the car, neighbors began peeking through curtains. A few stood on the street, watching silently. In a small town like Yankton, everyone knew each other, and seeing an old teacher, cuffed and taken away, was unthinkable. Clara sat in the back, facing Kepler. He looked up, gazing through the foggy window, and said in a low, raspy voice, "You think you've found the truth, but the truth isn't always pleasant, officer." Clara didn't respond. She opened the file on her lap, looking at Mary's photo. "Maybe not pleasant," she said softly, "but it's still the truth." The road to Pier was long and straight, flanked by wet gray fields and patches of unmelted snow. Wind rattled the car, whining steadily like the plains waking up. In the car, Thomas Kepler sat silent, eyes half closed, cuffed hands still, unmoving. Occasionally, he opened his eyes, glancing at Clara Shaw before looking away. No defiance in his gaze, but no remorse either. No one spoke further. The engine and wind were the only sounds stretching across the drive. When the Pier, 12-mile sign appeared in the gray fog, Clara exhaled softly, feeling some of the car's tension ease. They arrived at DCI headquarters on a gloomy morning. The building's basement was cold and quiet, footsteps echoing on the tile floor. Kepler was led down a long hallway, neon lights casting pale gray on the walls. Clara followed, clutching the thick file, her eyes fixed on the back of the man who'd kept a town waiting for 43 years. In the small interrogation room, harsh, white ceiling light reflected off a scratched metal table. The wall clock read 9 a.m., but Clara Shaw had been sitting for over 3 hours, eyes locked on the man before her. Thomas Kepler was mostly silent throughout. He sat upright, hands clasped, staring at a small scratch on the table, as if seeing through it to somewhere else, far and cold. Clara began the second interrogation calmly. "Mr. Kepler, we have DNA results matching you to evidence from the 1977 scene. The hair on the victim's car door handle carries your genetic markers. Care to explain that?" Kepler looked up, squinting as if the light hurt. "I told you," he said softly. "That night, I walked her to her car." "And?" Clara asked, voice steady, not rising. He took a breath, hands trembling slightly. It was dark. The road was slick. She fell down a slope. "I panicked." "Fell where?" "On Crow Creek Road." Clara looked straight at him. "She fell and died, and you, a grown, educated, sober man, decided not to call the police, but hide the body." Kepler fell silent. His aged eyes drifted elsewhere. The room sank into a long quiet, only the recording device humming steadily. Clara leaned back, keeping her breathing even. She knew this old criminal's silence wasn't fear. It was calculation. Those who live with guilt too long don't lie. They just choose what not to say. Mr. Kepler, she continued, you taught school for 30 years. You know concealing a body is a felony. You want me to believe for 40 years you were just panicked. Kepler gave a faint, thin smile, like a cut. You wouldn't understand. When snow falls that thick, it covers everything. She was lying there. I looked and didn't know what to do. I thought the snow would bury it all, and I let it. Clara tilted her head, voice lowering. You're lying. She slid the note across the table, the one found in his house, February 18th. She fell. You wrote this to remind yourself of what, or to justify it? Kepler didn't look at the paper, just closed his eyes. I didn't write it for you. I wrote it for me, so I wouldn't forget that night was real. For the next 3 hours, Clara shifted tactics. She stopped pressing, instead recounting details he surely knew: the red glove, the blood-stained scarf, the size 10 men's boot print in the snow. Kepler sat quietly, occasionally nodding slightly, as if hearing an old story he'd buried himself. Finally, Clara displayed the scene photo on a screen, the snow-covered Ford Pinto, dried blood on the rear door. You say she fell, but this blood is 30 inches up, off the ground, higher than a natural fall, and your boot print was nearby. Want to revise your statement? After a long pause, Kepler spoke, slow and heavy. She slipped. I tried to pull her up. Her head hit the car door. I didn't think she was dead, but when I checked, no breath. I sat there. I don't know how long. Then I heard the wind. I thought, if someone saw me, they wouldn't believe me. Clara scribbled every word. And then what did you do? He glanced at her, voice dry. I drove her away, found a place to bury her. Where? Silence. Clara stayed patient. 6 hours had passed. Coffee went cold. The light turned dull yellow. She knew this was the breaking point. She lowered her voice, almost a whisper. Mr. Kepler, everything you say is recorded. You have nothing left to hide. We found the Crow Creek map in your house. If you want this to end, tell us where you left her. Kepler looked up. For the first time his eyes flashed with fatigue, or surrender. He rubbed his face, voice hoarse. The old warehouse, behind Crow Creek Forest. I worked there part-time as a student. I left her in the old concrete foundation. It's probably gone now. Clara stared at him. You buried her yourself? He nodded faintly, eyes on the table. I covered her with dirt, then cement. No one knew. I thought the snow would forget. Clara stood, stepped into the hallway, heart pounding. She signaled Ben and the waiting forensic team. Prepare a search warrant for the Crow Creek site, she said quickly. He confessed. Back in the room, Kepler leaned back, eyes closed, exhausted. Clara turned off the recorder, saying curtly, We'll verify your statement. Kepler gave a faint smile. I know, you'll find her. But nothing's intact anymore. That afternoon, the search warrant was approved by the court. The forensic team, geotechnical vehicles, and ground-penetrating radar were dispatched from Sioux Falls. Clara stood before a large bulletin board, displaying a map of Crow Creek Forest with a red dot marking warehouse. The wind blew through the window, making the map's edges tremble slightly. She touched the dot, as if touching the pulse of a secret that had lain dormant for 43 years. Inside the holding cell, Kepler sat on a chair, gazing at the concrete courtyard where evening shadows fell. He closed his eyes, whispering something the guard couldn't hear, only seeing his lips form 2 words, Crow Creek. Across the state, where the old dirt road ran along the Missouri River, rain began to fall, streaming down paths once covered in snow. And there, beneath the cold earth, the truth he had just revealed waited to be named. The next morning, the sky over northern Crow Creek was a dull gray. Clouds hung low, almost touching the ground, and cold winds swirled through barren trees. The cold case unit's convoy rolled slowly along the dirt road to the abandoned warehouse. The building lay hidden behind dense pines, its cracked concrete walls and rusted tin roof barely standing. Once a storage shed for a local transport company's farm equipment, it had been deserted since the 1980s. According to Kepler's confession, this place had swallowed Mary Ellison 43 years ago. Clara Shaw stepped out of the vehicle, taking a deep breath. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth and rusted metal. She looked around. The scene was bleak, with weeds pushing through cracked bricks, and half the roof collapsed. The engine's hum faded, leaving only the silence of wind through empty windows. Ben Hartford, leading the technical team, approached. Radar teams ready. We'll start at the southwest corner, per his statement. Clara nodded, opening her notebook. 2 technicians from the Sioux Falls Forensic Center set up the ground-penetrating radar, a device capable of scanning structures beneath concrete. The screen displayed hazy gray waveforms, curving like echoes from the earth. Strong winds made the cables vibrate, their rattling blending into the desolate setting. Each time the device moved, the portable computer emitted a short tick, logging changes in subsurface density. Nearly an hour later, a technician paused, frowning at the screen. "Something's here," he said, pointing to an irregular dark shape on the scan, an oval, roughly 1.5 meters long, about 1.8 meters below the concrete. Clara stepped closer, studying it. "That's not a natural structure," the technician confirmed. "Could be a void or decomposed organic material." A digging order was issued immediately. The team drilled through the thick concrete, each fragment cracking with a dry snap. As the first drill broke through, the smell of concrete dust mixed with heavy damp earth. Clara, gloved, leaned down to inspect the broken concrete. Beneath the gray slab was dark, slightly wet soil. "Keep going, another 30 centimeters, she signaled. When the first shovel hit something hard, no one spoke. A technician knelt, brushing away soil with a soft broom. Slowly, a small bone emerged. Ivory-colored, brittle with time. "Human bone," he said softly. Almost a whisper. Clara leaned in, heart racing. The next brushstrokes revealed a forearm bone. Then part of a skull, cracked on the right side. Around it were fragments of red wool, clinging to the soil. "Stop. Secure the entire area," Clara said, voice calm, but eyes fixed on the open pit. The technician set up a temporary fence and stretched a white tarp to block the wind. A camera was mounted on a tripod, its light illuminating the hole. The space was utterly silent. Even the wind seemed to pause as they lifted the first bone fragments onto a tray. Near the skull, a technician found a small silver bracelet, tarnished, but clearly engraved with "Me, Clara," recognized it instantly. From an old file photo of Mary wearing it at Christmas 1976. She gripped her notebook tightly, throat tightening. In the afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the forest, the state's dental forensics team arrived. They carefully collected 3 intact teeth, sealing them in separate bags. Mary Ellison's dental records, preserved from Chamberlain High by her father's request before a school transfer, were still on file. Initial comparisons showed the teeth matched perfectly in shape and position with the 1976 records. "It's her," the forensic dentist said quietly, removing his glasses, eyes misty. Clara stood by the excavation pit, watching the faint purple light of dusk fall on the exposed soil. A heavy feeling swelled in her chest, not the joy of victory, but a deep sadness at reaching the ending everyone dreaded. Mary had been here all this time, just beneath a layer of concrete, while the world above kept turning. All evidence, bones, bracelet, wool fragments, surrounding soil, was sealed and loaded onto a specialized vehicle. As night fell, they filled the pit with sand, planting a small wooden stake labeled "Recovered Remains." Case 77-0412. Clara lingered last, looking up at the silent warehouse in the dark. An owl swooped past, its wings a soft breath. 3 days later, at the State Forensic Lab in Sioux Falls, DNA confirmation began. Bone samples were ground down, mitochondrial DNA extracted, and compared to the hair sample from Mary's old file. The screen showed 99.99% match. No doubt remained, this was Mary Ellison. The official report was sent to Prosecutor Rourke the next morning. Clara held a copy, the text clear. DNA comparison confirmed match between recovered remains. Cause of death, pending full autopsy. She sat alone in her office, rereading each line. Outside, The first snow of 2021 fell lightly, blanketing Pierre's rooftops. Clara felt time circle close, snow falling like the night Mary vanished, but this time, it fell to bring her back, not in doubt, but in truth. That afternoon, she called the Chamberlain Police Department, where one officer who had worked with Roy Gunderson remained. Hearing Mary's remains were found, he paused long before saying softly, "Roy passed 2 years ago. But I think, somewhere, he's smiling." Clara looked at Mary's Polaroid on her desk, replying quietly, "I believe so too." Night fell. She wrote the final entry in her notebook, Day 3, Crow Creek, remains recovered. Identification positive. After 43 years, she's home. Outside, snow kept falling. But this time, it hid nothing. The South Dakota State Forensic Lab sat isolated on Sioux Falls outskirts, a white building silent amid empty lots and low trees. On March 21, 2021, under a foggy sky, the specialized van, carrying Mary Ellison's remains, rolled slowly into the courtyard. The forensic team received the sealed metal container, transferring it to Autopsy Room 3. Clara Shaw was present, standing behind the observation glass with Prosecutor Rourke and Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Helen Morse, who led the autopsy. No one spoke as the container opened. Evidence bags were placed on a cold stainless steel table. Bones were cleaned, numbered, and arranged anatomically. On a board, photos of the Crow Creek site and excavation diagram were pinned side by side. Dr. Morse, gloved, leaned in, voice calm. 18 years old, female, near-complete skeleton. Let's begin. Metal tools clinked softly in the quiet space. Clara watched through the glass, gripping her notebook. In 8 years of cold casework, she'd seen many autopsies, but none like this, where a victim was found after over 4 decades, bones still bearing traces of her final night. Dr. Morse described each part: skull, right temporal bone fracture, sharp-edged break, likely from direct blunt force. The fracture pattern doesn't match a fall or slip. Cheek and jaw bones normal, no frontal impact damage. She paused, pointing with a metal rod. Here, the inner skull shows contusion marks, indicating the victim was alive during the blow. A chill ran down Clara's spine. Kepler's claim, "she fell," was now a blatant lie. That blow couldn't be a fall, it was an attack. Examining the neck and shoulder bones, Dr. Morse leaned closer, voice lowering. Bruising around cervical vertebrae C3 and C4, suggesting mechanical compression, likely by hand. This is a classic sign of strangulation or forceful restraint. She looked up through the glass. No soil scratches or marks on arm or leg bones, meaning she wasn't dragged or didn't fall. She was struck, lost consciousness, and died on the spot. Prosecutor Rourke nodded slowly, voice hoarse. No doubt left. Dr. Morse concluded, cause of death: traumatic brain injury from direct blunt force. Secondary strangulation evidence. Decomposition and fracture patterns suggest the body was buried and cemented hours after death. This wasn't an accident. It was intentional homicide and concealment. The forensic room was silent. Only Clara's pen scratched on paper, recording each line. No sliding marks. No fall evidence. Blunt force trauma confirmed. Concealment consistent with intentional burial. When she paused, her hand trembled slightly, but her eyes stayed on the autopsy room, where Dr. Morse sealed the final evidence bag. That afternoon, Clara and Rourke sat in a small forensic center office, light from the window falling on white walls. On the table, the preliminary report lay between them, nearly 30 pages thick. Rourke flipped through skull photos. "This blow came from behind," he said softly. "If he says she fell, why is the injury at a right-handed strike angle, at an adult's height?" Clara replied, "Because she didn't fall. She was attacked from behind." She opened the Crow Creek map, pointing to an area 50 meters from the warehouse. "This is where we found tire marks in the 1977 photos. When his car stopped, Mary was in the passenger seat. They argued. Maybe she wanted out. He struck her, then took the body to the warehouse. It all fits the timeline and distances in his confession." Rourke stayed silent, eyes on the gray sky outside. He'd handled many cases, but few made him feel time itself was an accomplice. "We'll need the full report to move to prosecution," he said. "Forensics is the key now." Clara nodded, gathering the papers, eyes resolute. "I won't let him slip, not this time." 2 days later, the 2021 forensic report was released. The first page was bolded, State of South Dakota, Forensic Division Report Case. 77 Ts. 0412 Subject. Ellison Mary, recovered remains from Crow Creek warehouse site. Findings, fracture to right temporal bone, consistent with blunt force trauma. Cervical contusions, consistent with manual strangulation. No soil residue or pattern of accidental fall. Burial under cement layer approx. 1.8 m deep. Conclusion, homicide, intentional assault and concealment. Holding the report, Clara knew all final doubts were gone. Each line cut through the story Kepler had built to hide for 43 years. That evening, back at her Pierre motel, Clara opened her cabinet and took out Mary's Polaroid, which she'd kept. In the dim light, the 18-year-old's face seemed to smile. Clara placed the photo on the table beside the signed report. Outside, Missouri River winds blew softly, carrying March's familiar chill. She wrote in her notebook, the entry small and neat, forensic confirmed, not a fall, not fear, not mistake. Violence. Justice will proceed. The next morning, stepping out of the building, Clara saw the sun rise, piercing the fog. She paused, watching light reflect on the forensic center's glass roof. Roy Gunderson's old file note echoed in her mind, "Some cases, only snow, and time will answer." Now, the snow had melted. And the answer had emerged, not in words, but in the traces of bone, blood, and undeniable truth. Mary Ellison was murdered. News of finding Mary Ellison's remains spread among state officials faster than Clara expected. Within a week, the Brule County Prosecutor's Office called a closed-door meeting with Prosecutor James Rourke, DCI representatives, the Cold Case Unit, and the State Forensic Division. No press, no public statements, just a sealed room where the 2021 forensic report was read, line by line. Rourke, a man in his 50s with a deep voice, spoke clearly, placing the thick file before the group. Physical, biological, and DNA evidence confirm unmistakably the victim was directly attacked. The perpetrator concealed the body under concrete to obstruct investigation. With this evidence, we're charging second-degree murder and concealment of a dead body. Clara sat quietly in the corner, listening. Everything she and her team had done over the past 12 months was being formalized into the language of justice. No longer a hunch or dusty file, now it was official charges, carrying the weight of law. Rourke turned to her, eyes steady. "You'll be the primary witness on the case reopening and evidence collection. You're also responsible for providing all DNA and Kepler's initial statement documentation." Clara nodded. "Yes, sir." 2 days later, the indictment was released internally. State of South Dakota versus Thomas Richard Kepler charges. Second-degree murder, concealment of a dead body evidence, DNA match forensic trauma report, recovered artifacts, suspect's confession. Prosecuting attorney, James Rourke. Hearing date April 15, 2021, Pierre County Courthouse. The morning Kepler was transferred from the holding cell to the Pierre County Courthouse. The sky was overcast, with steady drizzle. The press caught wind, and a few local reporters stood outside, cameras raised. But Kepler, in an orange jumpsuit, remained unnervingly calm. He stepped out of the van, hands cuffed, head slightly bowed, but mouth faintly smiling at the lenses. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy as fog. Rourke sat at the prosecution table, hand on the file. Across from him, defense attorney Martha Dwyer, a sharp gray-haired woman, represented Kepler pro bono. As the hearing opened, she stood, voice calm. "Your Honor, my client is 68, in poor health, with a history of heart issues, and has no prior convictions. He doesn't deny the tragic 1977 incident, but maintains it was an accident. He panicked, didn't know how to handle it, and made the mistake of not reporting it. We request reconsideration of the second-degree murder charge." Rourke responded without hesitation. An accident doesn't leave a skull fracture from a hard object, doesn't leave strangulation marks, doesn't hide a body under concrete and cover it up for 43 years. This was intentional, and age doesn't erase criminal intent. In the observer's row, Clara sat still, hands clenched. She looked at Kepler, the once respected teacher, sitting there, back straight, eyes cold as if detached from himself. When Rourke displayed the Crow Creek scene photos, the projector's light reflected on Kepler's face, but he didn't blink. The court heard Clara's testimony for 2 hours. She detailed the evidence collection, DNA results, and interrogation process. He wasn't coerced, she said firmly. He admitted to burying her, and now science proves it. Dwyer stood to object, asking, "Miss Shaw, do you have evidence my client intended to kill?" "He says it was an accident." Clara replied, "Yes. A hard blow from behind at his right-handed strike angle. If it was an accident, why from behind? Why strangle? Why bury and cement?" The courtroom fell silent. Dwyer lowered her hand, returning to the defense table. Kepler said nothing. When the hearing ended, Judge Ruth Callahan read a brief ruling. Based on physical evidence, witness testimony, and forensic reports, the court finds sufficient grounds for prosecution. The case is moved to trial under Statute 22-16-7. Defendant Thomas Richard Kepler will remain in custody without bail. Rourke exhaled softly, and Clara closed her eyes for a second, as if releasing a heavy stone from her chest. As Kepler was led out, he glanced back at her, a faint smile flickering. "You took years to find me," he said quietly, as he passed. "But I spent a lifetime waiting for you to do it." His words sent a chill through Clara, not from threat, but from their eerie calm, as if his arrest was just the next inevitable chapter. That evening, at the cold case unit office, Clara got a call from Rourke. He said curtly, "The court approved. Trial starts in June. You did well, but brace yourself. He won't plead guilty. They'll play the age, health, and late remorse card." Clara looked out the window, snow melting on the glass, leaving long murky streaks. "That's fine," she replied. "The truth doesn't age with them." On her desk, Mary's Polaroid remained under clear glass. The light reflected on the young girl's face like a faint flame, still bright in the dark. Beside it, the newly printed indictment, nearly 100 pages, read on the cover, State of South Dakota Fezzi's Thomas R. Kepler case reopened and charged, March 2021. After 43 years, Mary Ellison's name was finally read aloud in a state courtroom, not as a missing victim, but as a murder victim. And Kepler, once a potential suspect in an old file, now stood under the defendant column. Justice, though slow, had begun to move. The State Forensic Tech Lab sat in a 2-story concrete building in Sioux Falls, where blue screen light illuminated focused faces. Days after the indictment, the Cold Case Unit and Criminal Science Division collaborated to reconstruct the Mary Ellison crime scene at prosecutor James Rourke's request. The goal was to prove physically that no accidental fall could cause the skull trauma and strangulation marks Kepler claimed. Clara Shaw was present as the tech team began the 3D model. A 1977 Chamberlain topographic map was scanned from old records, detailing Crow Creek Road, the slope's terrain, and the Ford Pinto's position. Weather data, snow density, and wind speed from February 18 were inputted into the simulation. A 3D specialist explained, "We'll calculate fall force based on the victim's body weight and the actual slope to see if it could cause the temporal bone fracture noted in the report." On the screen, a virtual model emerged, a snow-white road, the faint yellow glow of the Blue Moose Diner in the distance, the Ford parked at an angle by the roadside. The simulated figure, a girl, 5'4", 115 pounds, was posed based on Mary's anthropological data. As the program ran, it showed the slope was only 8 degrees, not steep enough for a fall to cause the skull fracture at that position. Clara watched the screen's graphs, thousands of simulated falls calculated, but all results were the same, no impact force strong enough to cause the right temporal trauma. The lead engineer pointed to the graph on display, This is the impact energy limit for a natural fall. But the skull fracture indicates a force 3 times higher that only happens with a solid object like an iron bar or a heavy blow from behind. He projected a second simulation, the trajectory of the strike, the contact angle, and the results matched perfectly with the injury location noted in Dr. Morse's forensic report. Clara felt a chill down her spine. The scene on the screen, though just data, made her imagine the real moment, the car's headlights cutting through snow, Mary possibly turning back, calling his name, and then the blow. "What about the strangulation marks?" Rourke asked, voice hoarse. The engineer flipped to the next simulation. The screen showed 2 figures, one standing, one kneeling, with the trajectory of neck compression. The bruising at C3 and C4 vertebrae could only occur if someone restrained from behind when the victim was already off balance. The hand marks, based on bone size, match a male hand, 19 centimeters long. Kepler is right-handed. It all fits. The room fell silent. Only the hum of the fan and the computer's low buzz remained. Finally, Rourke said, "I want this entire simulation exported to video for court presentation." 3 days later, the complete reconstruction was finished. An 8-minute video combining real crime scene photos and a 3D model of the incident. In the video, wind howled, lights dimmed, and 2 figures, one standing, one turning away, appeared against a snowy backdrop. The strike was simulated with a red flash. Then the scene shifted to the concrete layer under the Crow Creek warehouse, where the body was buried. At the end, white text appeared, "No accidental fall can produce the injuries observed." On June 18, 2021, the video was shown during the preliminary trial at the Pierre Courthouse. Clara sat in the witness row, faint light reflecting on her face as the images played on a large screen. The 12-person jury was silent. Meanwhile, Kepler sat in the defendant's row, eyes fixed on the screen, expressionless. When the simulation showed the blow from behind, he slightly turned his head, lips moving with inaudible words. Rourke stood, addressing the jury, "This is science, not speculation. Science says Mary Ellison didn't fall. She was struck, strangled, and buried. Physical, biological, and technical evidence all point one way." Thomas Kepler. Defense attorney Martha Dwyer tried to counter, "Simulations are assumptions, not physical evidence. We can't know the wind force or ground conditions that night," but Rourke cut in, calmly, "I'm afraid we know quite well. All meteorological data from February 18, 1977, was reconstructed from the National Weather Service, and this system confirms winds at 10 miles per hour, temperature minus 12 degrees. No condition could cause a fatal fall like that. The only thing that could was a strike." When the video ended, the courtroom remained utterly silent. The jury exchanged glances, and Judge Callahan leaned down to take notes. Rourke looked at Clara, his eyes acknowledging that her work had turned the case. After that session, the video was officially logged as Evidence Exhibit A, Forensic Reconstruction. The press began reporting, "Cold Case 1977, 3D, simulation reveals no accident." The public saw Mary Ellison's reconstruction for the first time, not through an old photo, but through a digital model showing the truth of her final night. That evening, Clara returned to her office, replaying the video on her laptop. She watched until the final frame, where the text "She didn't fall, she was struck" appeared, then turned off the screen. In the quiet room, only the soft patter of rain sounded outside. She wrote in her notebook, her handwriting firm and decisive. For 43 years, they called it a disappearance. Now it has a shape, a force, a sound, and a name. Outside, through the fogged glass, the Missouri River flowed quietly under the sunset. Cold wind from Crow Creek carried the smell of damp earth, reminding Clara, justice never arrives suddenly. It comes bit by bit, through science, persistence, and people who refuse to forget. In September 2021, the Brule County Courthouse in Chamberlain opened the trial for the Mary Ellison case. Over 43 years after that snowy night, her name echoed again in the small, quiet town along the Missouri River. On the first day, the sky was heavy with gray clouds, cold river air sweeping into the courthouse square. Dozens of locals gathered outside, some former students of Kepler, others drawn by curiosity. They whispered, "Can't believe it. He taught my high school physics class." Clara Shaw sat in the prosecution row beside James Rourke. Before them was a thick stack of evidence, neatly numbered, DNA samples, Crow Creek maps, the silver ME bracelet, the Polaroid photo, and the 3D reconstruction video. All were arranged in layers, like a score guiding viewers from the night of her disappearance to Mary's final moments. Kepler was led into the courtroom at 9 a.m. He wore an old gray suit, shirt buttoned tightly, silver hair covering his forehead, back straight. No one heard the clink of handcuffs, but the metallic sound seemed to linger in everyone's minds. As he sat, he glanced briefly at the gallery, then lowered his head, silent. Judge Ruth Callahan struck her gavel to open the trial. The prosecution began with Rourke, his voice steady and firm. "Your Honor, this case was once buried with snow and time, but justice doesn't vanish. It waits until science is strong enough to speak for the silenced. DNA evidence, forensic results, and 3D reconstruction show Mary Ellison didn't fall. She was struck, strangled, and buried under concrete. The only person with her that night was defendant Thomas Kepler." He paused, looking toward the defendant's row. Kepler remained still, hands clasped, eyes vacant as if staring through the wall. For the defense, Martha Dwyer stood, speaking softly, deliberately emotional. "My client is an elderly man, in poor health. He's carried this burden for 40 years. Yes, he erred by not reporting to police, but this was an accident, not murder. There are no direct witnesses, no weapon, no one saw him act." Rourke responded with action, not words. He played the 3D reconstruction video. The room's lights dimmed, leaving only the large screen showing snow, Crow Creek Road, and the abandoned Ford Pinto. When the simulated strike appeared, red light flashed across faces. Some in the gallery shuddered. In the front row, a distant relative of Mary's sobbed, covering her mouth. After the video, Rourke presented the DNA result. He held up the forensic certificate. The hair on the car door handle, collected in 1977, carries a 100% Y chromosome match to the defendant's sample. No one else touched Mary Ellison's car that night. Next, he called Dr. Helen Morse, the forensic examiner, to testify. She detailed the injuries. The traumatic brain injury couldn't result from a fall. Neck bruising indicates forceful restraint or strangulation. The death wasn't accidental. Time of death aligns with February 18, 1977. She looked at Kepler, voice low but certain. This was an attack, not an accident. Clara was called late morning. She recounted the case reopening, DNA analysis, and Kepler's confession. Rourke asked, "Miss Shaw, did the defendant ever deny burying the body?" She replied, "No," he said. "I left her under the concrete. I thought the snow would bury it all." Dwyer objected, trying to redirect. "Miss Shaw, can you be certain my client intended to kill, not acted in panic?" Clara looked straight at her. "A panicked person doesn't hide a body, pour concrete and live calmly for 43 years. That's not fear, it's control." The courtroom was silent. Judge Callahan called a recess. During the break, Clara leaned against a hallway wall, breathing deeply. Wind from the Missouri River slipped through a window, cold and damp. She looked down at the street, where dozens still stood in the autumn rain, waiting for news. In the afternoon, Rourke presented the final piece, Kepler's confession. The audio played clearly through speakers. "She slipped. I thought she was dead. I panicked. I buried her in the warehouse floor." Rourke paused, then showed excavation photos, the ME bracelet, wool fragments, and numbered bones. He looked at the jury. He didn't just bury her, he buried the truth. Kepler sat still. He never looked at the screen. Occasionally, his hands trembled, but whether from age or something else was unclear. When Rourke asked directly, "Mr. Kepler, do you have anything to say to the court?" he replied, only in a short, raspy voice. "I didn't kill anyone, I just left behind what I couldn't carry." That evening, Judge Callahan closed the first day. Court is adjourned. The next session resumes tomorrow morning. Everyone stood. As police escorted Kepler out, he glanced back briefly. His eyes not on Rourke or the jury, but on Clara. For a second, she caught his gaze. No longer arrogant or cold, just empty, like someone who'd long seen the end coming. Outside, wind from the river blew strong, carrying the rustle of leaves. Clara stepped down the courthouse steps, looking up at the old building, its windows lit in the night. She knew tomorrow would continue, final evidence, heated arguments, and eventually a verdict. But for her, this trial wasn't just about convicting a man. It was about giving a voice back to the girl buried in snow years ago. She stood still for a long time, wind tugging her hair, then opened her notebook and wrote briefly, "Trial day 1, he's still silent." But the truth isn't. Above, a faint moon shone through the Missouri River's ripples, and somewhere in Chamberlain's silence, the past was being called forth, bit by bit. On the trial's final day, Chamberlain's sky was heavy with leaden clouds. Wind from the Missouri River blew fiercely, flapping the South Dakota flag outside the courthouse. From early morning, locals filled both sides of the gray stone steps. Everyone was quiet, no clamor, just a silent anticipation spreading through the air. The familiar feeling of a place awaiting a verdict after decades of waiting for justice. Inside, Judge Ruth Callahan sat at the highest bench. The prosecution had James Rourke, face stern but eyes bright. Clara Shaw sat in the back row with the cold case unit. Before them, Thomas Kepler, in a dark suit, silver hair over his forehead, sat motionless as a statue. Over 2 weeks of trial, he spoke only 3 times, all denying the charges. Today, his eyes remained cold and deep as a void. The judge instructed the jury to retire for deliberation. The door closed. In the hallway, time seemed to slow. Everyone stayed seated, no one leaving. Clara looked out a window, seeing fog rise from the Missouri River, cloaking the Chamberlain Bridge. 43 years ago, under such fog, Mary Ellison vanished from this town. She wondered, if Roy Gunderson were alive, how would he feel seeing justice finally emerge from the mist? 3 hours passed, then 4, then 5. The courtroom air grew thick. Rourke leaned back, eyes closed, hands clasped. Across the room, defense attorney Martha Doyer scribbled notes, occasionally glancing at the clock. Kepler sat still, expressionless, sometimes pursing his lips, as if calculating something. Nearly 8 hours later, as late afternoon light filtered through the windows, the deliberation room door opened. The 12 jurors filed in, faces solemn. No one spoke, only the creak of shoes on the wood floor. The room held its breath. Judge Callahan asked, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman, a middle-aged man with graying hair, stood. His voice was low, firm. "Yes, Your Honor. We, the jury, after reviewing all evidence, testimony, and arguments, conclude Defendant Thomas Richard Kepler is guilty of second-degree murder under South Dakota Statute 22-16-7. For a moment, absolute silence. Then a soft murmur rose, like wind through a crowd. Clara clenched her fists, feeling blood rush to her temples. Beside her, Rourke took a deep breath, eyes briefly closing, then opening, as if setting down a weight carried for years. The judge nodded, her voice clear. The court sentences. 30 years imprisonment at the South Dakota State Penitentiary. The court notes the severity of the act. Intentional injury causing death, concealment of the body, and evasion of justice for 43 years. The defendant's age does not lessen criminal responsibility. The gavel struck the bench. The sound echoed sharply, breaking through the room. On the prosecution side, Rourke stood, his voice trembling slightly in his closing statement. Your Honor, justice came late, 43 years, but it didn't lose its way. No time is long enough to erase a crime. And no snow can bury the truth. He paused, looking at Clara. Thank you to the cold case unit, for not letting an old case be forgotten. Everyone in the courtroom stood. Some locals wiped tears. A few of Kepler's former students bowed their heads, unable to look. In the back row, an elderly woman whispered, "They finally found her." Police approached to cuff Kepler. He didn't resist, only turned his head, eyes sweeping past Rourke and settling on Clara. No hatred, no fear, just an empty gaze of a man with nothing left to lose. As he passed her, he said softly, almost a breath, "Now you have the truth. But does it make you feel lighter?" Clara didn't answer. She watched him be let out, his shoes clicking faintly on the wood floor. The heavy door closed, the metallic clang echoing through the hallway. That afternoon, the court adjourned. Late sunlight streamed through the glass windows, falling on the empty bench where Kepler had sat. Clara stood alone in the courtroom, looking at the judge's bench. Everything was quiet, save the lingering echo of the verdict. She opened her notebook, writing briefly. Verdict: guilty, 30 years. Justice delayed, not lost. Outside, the crowd dispersed. A strong wind carried early autumn leaves across the steps. Rourke approached, handing her a hot coffee. "I thought this case would stay in the archives forever," he said, voice low. "You pulled it out of the dark." Clara gave a faint smile. "Not me. Mary did." Her DNA spoke. They stood silently, looking out the window where the Missouri River reflected the faint gold of sunset. That river had seen it all. The disappearance, the search, and now the verdict. The water flowed as it had 43 years ago, but today its surface was calmer. That night, back at her small hotel room near the Chamberlain Bridge, Clara opened her bag and took out Mary's Polaroid, the photo she'd carried since reopening the case. Under the desk lamp, Mary's face was blurred, but her smile remained intact. Clara placed it beside her notebook, where the final page read, Case 77-0412. Closed. Truth confirmed. Justice delivered. Night wind blew through the window, carrying the soft lapping of water against the shore. Clara closed the notebook, turned off the light, and let darkness take the room. In that silence, she knew, though the snow had melted, Mary Ellison's justice would never fade. The Mary Ellison case is not just a solved crime story after 43 years. It reflects a profound lesson about faith and justice, the power of science, and human persistence in today's American society. In an era where news and justice seem to move too fast, this case reminds us that some truths take time to emerge. But that doesn't mean they're lost. Investigator Clara Shaw proved that justice isn't something that comes naturally. It's the result of thousands of meticulous hours, perseverance, and belief that no crime is too old to be heard again. The detail of her finding a single hair in the 1977 file, sparking the case's reopening, vividly illustrates the power of modern forensic technology, while underscoring the importance of preserving data and faith in science, something American society continues to strengthen. The broader lesson lies in how the justice system responded. South Dakota didn't just close a case, it launched the Cold Truth Initiative, reviewing hundreds of forgotten exhibits. This shows a society that learns from mistakes, turning pain into reform. With every memorial like Mary's, Americans are reminded that behind each case is not just a victim, but a chance to do better in ethics, professionalism, and how we treat memory. As the story's final message states, when the snow melts, the truth remains. Justice, when guarded by intellect and compassion, will never be buried. Thank you for following Mary Ellison's story, a journey showing that justice may sleep, but it never vanishes. If you believe the truth always finds a way to be uncovered, subscribe to our channel to explore more cold cases where the past still whispers to be heard.